You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're listening to the Holonet Podcast here on the Lanterns Media Network. Once again, from beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, I'm your host, Matt Holloway. We haven't spoken in a little while. Took the weekend off for Easter. It was good times. But now, it's time to get back to work. And we've got our work cut out for us. Because it's been 100 years since the Battle of Ambos Nogales. And once again, Arizona finds itself about to be on the front lines. All that and more here on the Holonet Podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. Stick around.
You're listening to the HoloNet Podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. The new conservative resistance begins right here, right now.
I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words.
The American people are frustrated because their elected officials don't listen. When we're home on the campaign trail, we say we listen. And yet something about this Senate floor, something about Washington, D.C., I don't know if it's the water, something in the air, the cherry blossom, but people get here and they stop listening to the American people.
What we witnessed here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten. It's one more example of the United Nations doing more harm than good in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
My duty, and the sacred duty of every elected official in this chamber, is to defend Americans, to protect their safety, their families, their communities, and their right to the American dream. Because Americans are dreamers too.
I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the rewards of their own industry. This is the chief meaning of freedom. Until we can reestablish a condition under which the earnings of the people can be kept by the people, we are bound to suffer a very severe and distinct curtailment of our liberty.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Senators, members of Congress, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. President. You had one damn job. Seriously.
You're listening to the HoloNet on Lanterns Media Network.
The millennial conservative resistance begins here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, yes, that is right. The new conservative resistance does indeed begin right here, right now with you. You're listening to the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. Today is a little bit of a different show than you may have come to expect from this particular podcast, and I hope you'll stick around for the full duration because we have a lot to get through, and a really interesting paradox is coming our way here in the Grand Canyon state of Arizona. Once again, we find ourselves on the front lines. Once again, there's talk of militarization of America's southern border. And I, for one, think it is the next logical step. We'll get into that a little bit more later. But first, I want to give you a little bit of our history here in the Grand Canyon state, in the desert Southwest, that makes the border so very important and so very real to us. Now, for many of you who live elsewhere in the country, you may not realize how close, how very close, the largest population center in Arizona is to the border with Mexico. Phoenix is just a couple hours drive from the border. Tucson's even closer. Tucson's practically on top of it. My parents lived down near the Gila River, which until the Gadsden Purchase was completed following the Mexican-American War, was in fact the border. That's right. For a little while there, the border ran along the Gila River. The Gila River, which runs just south of Phoenix, through the town of Gila Bend and present-day Buckeye. Buckeye, which is rapidly becoming one of the largest cities in Arizona. So I want to take you back in time. 100 years, to August 27th, 1918. The Battle of Ambos Nogales. Ambos meaning both Nogales, because Nogales is and was a city which straddled the border. Today, they are split as the cities of Nogales, Arizona, and the Mexican Sonoran city of Heroica, Nogales. Now, this comes to us from AWB.com, a spoonful of history from Applewood Books, The Daily Dose. In 1918, International Street ran down the center of Ambos Nogales. Arizona lay to the north, Sonora to the south. The railroad depots, stores, and saloons straddled the border. If one lived in Nogales, Arizona or Nogales, Sonora, it made little difference socially. The residents from either side occasionally brawled over women or too much mezcal, but for the most part they enjoyed friendly relations and shared the benefits from the local economy based on smuggling cigars, liquor, firearms, and cattle. There had been a few skirmishes in the past, as when Pancho Villa had ridden into town, but still there was no fence down the middle of International Street. The residents understood the protocol. They were expected to cross at one of two entry points, either on Morley Avenue or farther west on Grand Avenue. When trains arrived at the border, first-class passengers could ride across in the cars, while those in coach got off the trains, walked, and then reboarded after passing through customs. On August 27, a carpenter named Gil La Madrid was walking back into Mexico. As he crossed the border, a U.S. Customs inspector ordered him to halt, curious about the large parcel he was carrying. Only a few feet away, Mexican customs officers directed him to ignore the summons and continue into Mexico. Gil La Madrid became confused and hesitated as the two competing groups of customs agents shouted instructions at him. At this point, a U.S. infantryman raised his Springfield rifle to encourage his return. In the midst of the ensuing commotion, a shot was fired, and the carpenter dropped to the ground. Thinking that the man had been shot, a Mexican customs officer grabbed his pistol and opened fire on the U.S. guards, wounding an Army private in the face. A U.S. inspector drew his revolver and returned fire, killing two Mexican customs officers. Shaken but unhurt, Gil La Madrid jumped up and sprinted down a nearby street. As the sound of gunfire rattled the neighborhood, citizens on the Mexican side of the border ran to their homes and picked up their rifles to join forces with the Mexican troops. The U.S. border authorities panicked. World War I was already being fought in Europe, and the Germans had been urging Mexicans to abandon their neutrality. Was another front in the war now open? A troop of Buffalo soldiers were called into town. Under heavy fire, the 10th Cavalry dismounted and crossed the border into the streets and buildings of Nogales, Sonora. Looking for a tactical advantage, the troops mounted an assault on the heights immediately to the east of the town, while militia on the Arizona side started firing their weapons from the windows and rooftops of houses. Late in the fighting, members of the 35th Infantry placed a machine gun on top of a stone building and fired on the Mexican positions. As the violence escalated, the mayor of Nogales, Sonora, took a white handkerchief, tied it to his cane, and ran to the streets of his city in his attempt to quell the violence. As U.S. troops crossed into the Mexican side of International Street, he pleaded with the angry crowd behind him to put down their weapons. A shot from the Arizona side felled the Mexican mayor. At 7:45 p.m., the Mexicans waved a large white flag of surrender over the customs building. After the battle was over and the dead were buried and peace was restored, the U.S. and Mexico authorities agreed to divide the two border communities with a chain-link border fence, the first border wall put in place between the two countries. Now this, folks, was a mere 100 years ago. In historical perspective, it was practically yesterday, when shots rang out and blood spilled in the streets of Ambos Nogales, Mexico. Now here we are, in April of 2018, and President Donald Trump, like President Barack Obama and like President George W. Bush before him, has given the order to deploy the National Guard to secure the lawless southwestern border of the United States. The reason that this is taking place now is because a century of progressive politics and corruption, which profited handsomely through the exploitation of our porous border and the exploitation of cheap labor from Mexico, has continued to allow it, and they encourage it. There have been many attempts over the years to try and quell and bring order back to the borderlands, all limited in their success, limited in their scale, and only as permanent as the presidency that created it. Point blank, full stop. The efforts of President Trump to deploy military forces to our border should be lauded, should be given stirring ovation and applause, because the military is sorely needed to restore order south of the Gila River, to reclaim lands where all but heavily armed border agents and law enforcement officials fear to tread, areas of Organ Pipe National Monument that are nay impassable, areas of the Tonaha O'odham lands where that tribe has asked again and again for greater support from the federal government to defray the costs, the mounting, staggering costs of rescuing migrants stranded in the desert and mountainous terrain of that area. The military deployment to our southern border is long overdue, as I've been calling for it through my various written works for at least the last 5 years. I looked at the historical accounts of Fort Naco and of the raid on Columbus, New Mexico during the Pancho Villa expedition, during which Mexican revolutionary leader Pancho Villa led a force of 1,500 guerrillas over the border into Columbus, New Mexico, and proceeded to burn the city to the ground. These are the memories, folks, that are seared into the minds of people who live in the Southwest, into the memories of the ranchers that live along that border still, who feel forgotten and abandoned by their countrymen and by their government. The militarization of our border with Mexico cannot happen fast enough. And every time I hear somebody trot out Posse Comitatus, it makes me want to slam my face into a keyboard. Because once again, the internet attorneys, the Google lawyers, as it were, the litigators of the left, they believe they have the answer, that you cannot use American troops to enforce the border. This is, on its face, a falsehood. Because the policing of the border is not a domestic issue. It, by its nature, is an international issue, and thus completely removes Posse Comitatus from the discussion. It is a matter of national sovereignty. But more on that when we come back from this quick break. You're listening to the HoloNet Podcast here on the Lanterns Media Network. Stick around as things are heating up down here in the borderlands.
I see people coming together not for divisiveness of party or for dichotomy of thought, but for unity in principle. In the principles that founded our nation, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today, ladies and gentlemen, those principles are under the sternest attack that we have seen in many generations. It has become a crime in this nation nearly to express a difference in opinion from what is held by your party to be doctrine, from what is purported by the media to be truth. We have an opportunity to reach out to our fellow Americans regardless of their creed and regardless of their political inclinations, and unite as Americans, not as Republicans or as Democrats, as liberals or conservatives, but to unite around the principles that have guided this nation so well. I've covered a lot of stories, but the story that remains untold is the story of America in the 21st century, when we choose to turn back the tide against progressive socialism, when we choose to embrace the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, when we remember what it is to be Americans. And that principle will not die as long as there's one man, one woman, one child who looks defiantly into the night and says, I am free.
You're listening to the HoloNet podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. The new conservative resistance begins right here, right now.
You're listening to the HoloNet on Lanterns Media Network. The Millennial Conservative Resistance begins here.
Oh, that is right. You're listening to the HoloNet podcast here on the Lanterns Media Network from beautiful Grand Canyon state of Arizona, home of copper, citrus, cattle, and I didn't go to public schools here, so I didn't learn the rest of the C's, but good place to live. Good place to live. I think one of the C's should be conservatism, because we seem to be exporting that in great quantities, pumped out live every week here on the HoloNet podcast. So, back to our earlier discussion of a century ago along the border. We discussed the Battle of Ambos Nogales, which took place in 1918. We also talked very briefly about the Battle of Columbus, the Pancho Villa, or Villanista attack on Columbus, New Mexico. If you check that out, that's on History.com. This day in history, Pancho Villa attacks Columbus, New Mexico. That was on March 9th. And it is very, very important that we keep knowledge of the incursions at the beginning of the century intact, just to let people know that not a hell of a lot has changed. Do we have Mexican revolutionary groups pouring over the border? No, they're not Mexican revolutionary groups. They're coyotes. They're human smugglers. They're drug smugglers. That is the invasion of today. 100 years ago, it was Mexican revolutionaries. Today, it's Mexican drug dealers and human smugglers. And they're just as pernicious, just as violent, and must be stopped and must have the same amount of force levied against them. President Wilson, in one of the very few reasonably good moves that man ever committed, sent General John J. Pershing, also known as Blackjack Pershing, to quell Pancho Villa and to go into Mexico and hunt him down. General Pershing unfortunately failed in that manner. He did not successfully hunt down Pancho Villa, but his incursion into Mexico did discourage Pancho Villa, or the Carranista government, from attacking the United States, and in fact is one of the things credited with encouraging Mexico to refuse the Zimmerman telegram, in which Imperial Germany invited Mexico to declare war on the United States in order to reclaim Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So again, I tell you, the situation in the Southwest has not significantly changed, except to say that there are more people involved now. Arizona is a much more populous state now than it was 100 years ago. And if anything, the illegal immigration problem has become more exacerbated over time as the prosperity of Arizona and New Mexico have drawn more illegal immigration to them. It's always been a problem in Texas, but really, Arizona and New Mexico having a significant issue with illegal immigration, that is a product of the last 50 years. And even in the last 10, 15 years, if you ask some people who've lived in Phoenix longer than I have, they'll tell you the city has seen a major change in character in several neighborhoods over the course of the last 15, 20 years. Some areas becoming nigh unlivable. That's the problem that we face today. And I believe that a military response is completely appropriate. We go real quickly to a news release here. This is on NewYorkTimes.com. President Trump announcing that the military will guard our border.
We're going to be doing things militarily until we can have a wall and proper security. We're going to be guarding our border with the military. We had Obama make changes. President Obama made changes that basically created no border. It's called catch and release. You catch them, you register them, they go into our country. We can't throw them out. And in many cases, they shouldn't be here. Many cases, they shouldn't be here. We will be doing things with Mexico, and they have to do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to do the NAFTA deal. NAFTA's been fantastic for Mexico, bad for us.
That's President Trump discussing the deployment of the military to the southern border. New York Times goes on to write, the White House said Tuesday night that President Trump planned to deploy the National Guard to the southern border to confront what it called the growing threat of illegal immigrants, drugs, and crimes from Central America, after the president, for the third consecutive day, warned about the looming dangers of unchecked immigration. Mr. Trump's advisors said Monday that he was readying new legislation to block migrants and asylum seekers, including young unaccompanied children, from entering the United States, opening a new front in the immigration crackdown that he has pressed since taking office. In remarks on Tuesday that caught some of his top advisors by surprise, he suggested the more drastic approach of sending the military to do what immigration authorities could not. Speaking to reporters during the news conference with the presidents of 3 Baltic nations, Mr. Trump described the existing immigration laws as lax and ineffective, and called for militarizing the border with Mexico to prevent an influx of Central American migrants he said were ready to stream across it. We have horrible, and very unsafe laws in the United States, Mr. Trump said. We are preparing for the military to secure our border between Mexico and the United States. And I feel that I can very honestly say, on behalf of conservatives and constitutionalists in Arizona, that it is about time. With no exaggeration. This has been a long time coming. I mean, I usually use this soundbite for my show. I haven't used it yet, but I'll use it.
Allied reinforcements have arrived from the west.
Thank God, reinforcements are coming to restore order to the international boundary between the United States and Mexico. Thank God. Roll in the troops. I would not be upset to see Bradley fighting vehicles on the back of trucks heading down the 10 or down the MC-85 or the I-8, deploying our troops immediately to the southern border to bring to a halt the horrific crisis of humanity that is human smuggling in the state of Arizona. When we had the Super Bowl here, there was a gigantic crackdown in Phoenix on prostitution. And there were, I believe, dozens upon dozens of arrests made of, you know, your pimps, your hookers, your johns. And the ugly, ugly side of that, even uglier than just the sex trade itself, was the fact that these were children. In many cases, these were extremely young women and children being brought into Arizona for the sex trade. My God. So how anyone in their ivory towers in the universities can look at this real, live, human crisis at our border and say, I'm for open borders, is beyond me. Have you no heart? Have you no compassion? People will say that constitutionalists and conservatives are heartless and cold because we're willing to separate families. My response is, no, I'm not talking about separating families. The whole family should leave. That's simple. If you were raised in the United States, brought here illegally as a child, and your parents are being deported, go with them. It's not the government's fault that your parents did something illegal and you got sucked along. That's on your parents. Put the blame where it lies. Dreamers, blame your parents. Quote me on it. Quote me on it. Holloway to dreamers, blame your parents. Don't blame the government. And you should go with them. If you're that worried about family unification, keeping your family together. Them's the breaks, kid. Them's the breaks. What brings me all to this, and what brought me to this, is Arizona is about to become the front line of a military operation. Because don't kid yourself. Do not kid yourself. Troops are being deployed to our southern border. That means Arizona is on the front lines. Even if our troops are not going down there with rules of engagement to shoot to kill, they are still going down there with rules of engagement that allow them to return fire if threatened. And if you don't believe for a second that they're going to be threatened, there's a bridge in Havasu that you need to buy. There will be firefights. There will be engagements. The cartels are not going to sit idly by while hundreds of American troops, hardware and materiel are deployed in their prime staging grounds. They will not roll over and die. They will need to be routed. And rout them out we shall. It is time, not just for National Guard, I would say that it is time to deploy regular army to our southern border. Let's up the ante. President Trump loves doubling and tripling down when he's already faced with scorn and condemnation from the left. Well, time to double down, man. You double down over nonsense. You double down over the crowd size at your inauguration. Double down here. Say, hell, I'm not going to deploy the National Guard. I am ordering a full-blown military deployment to the southern border of the United States in order to restore order and smooth operation. We are going to make it a full-blown militarily enforced border period, until such a time as the wall can be completed and the protection of our border can be sent back to civilian hands. It is time to reactivate the nascent military facilities along the southern border and to resume full military operations within that area. The government and the military are charged by the Constitution with one damn job: to defend our country. Get to work, folks. Get to work. Now, when we come back, we have a big problem here in Arizona. Because while we're about to become the front lines, there's rot from within. And the infestation has struck at the heart of the Sun Devils at Arizona State University. You're listening to the HoloNet Podcast on the Lanterns Media Network. Follow us on Twitter at Matt D. Holloway or at the HoloNet. We're on Facebook Live at facebook.com/HoloNet. Find us as always at holonet.lanterns.buzz or on theholonet.com. This is Matt Holloway, and I hope you're enjoying our podcast so far. It's been exciting putting this together for you, and I'm looking forward to many more to come. I did want to let you know that in setting up the HoloNet and getting everything launched here, we've gone ahead and set up a page on Patreon.com. Now, if you haven't heard of Patreon, Patreon is a website that's similar to other crowdfunding sources that allows you to support on a month-to-month basis those sources, those artists, and those groups that you really care about and that you're passionate about. And I hope that, we can ignite passion in a lot of people to become more involved in the political process and also to become involved in the conversation and to keep that political dialogue alive. So I'd like to humbly ask you today to consider becoming a patron of the HoloNet on Patreon.com, and you can access that at Patreon.com/theholonet. We have various levels of patronage. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month, which unlocks exclusive content for the Patreon community, such as a feed of patron-only content. Then you have a $5 option, which gives you behind-the-scenes access to blog about the different inspirations that we have. It'll give you access to patrons-only polling. And then we have a $10 option, which gives you a signed digital poster plus everything else. $20 option, which gives you naming the credits on the site and all other rewards. And we even have a segment sponsor package available on Patreon, which is $125 a month, which entitles you and your business to a 60-second ad as a segment sponsor during the podcast, of course, subject to content approval. So if you would like to become a patron of the HoloNet, we would be greatly thankful to you, and it's going to go toward a solid cause of generating this sort of millennial constitutional conservative content that is so lacking in our media today. So thank you for your time, for your consideration, and for being a part of the HoloNet. Here we hold the line against the night, and the millennial conservative resistance begins here.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Allied reinforcements have arrived from the west.
You're listening to the HoloNet on Lanterns Media Network. The Millennial Conservative Resistance begins here.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the HoloNet Podcast here on the Lanterns Media Network into the second half hour, chasing down that home stretch. Today is Sunday, April the 8th in the year of our Lord 2018. I realize I didn't say that at the beginning of the show like I'm supposed to. Oh, God. Live right now on lanterns.buzz. Check out the story, America is a Republic, not a Democracy, deliberately to protect us from emotional, irrational reactions like March for Our Lives. That was the big story we put out there about 2 weeks ago. That is now on Lanterns Buzz if you want to check it out there, along with our other extremely talented men and women, my fellow Lanterneers who are writers, broadcasters, and also ambassadors there. A couple of shout-outs would be to the Defenders of American Exceptionalism, Dylan Lyles, Stephen Airy, a couple of good buddies of mine. Also, Watson Prunier, another one of our fantastic Lanterneers. You can catch them a little bit later on today. So make sure you check them out on lanterns.buzz. You can also find everything that I write up there on that website as well. All of the podcasts of the past on lanterns.buzz. Enough plugging the network. Ugh. I feel like I'm one of our local hosts on a rock radio station here. He's fond of saying he's shilling away. Well, now that I've gone ahead and ripped that off, let's get to this latest abomination, and I'm surprised that nobody's put a story out about this yet. I know I plan to, so make sure you keep an eye on the HoloNet and also on lanterns.buzz to check it out. But at our very own Arizona State University, this just came up. If you're an alumni, you might have received an email. But they have opened up the Arizona State University School of Social Transformation. That's right, the School of Social Transformation, which describes their academic programs. Earning a degree at the School of Social Transformation means more than a liberal arts education from 5 interdisciplinary fields. We unite students and faculty across boundaries to create social change that is democratic, inclusive, and just. As a student in our school, you'll study diversity and justice and learn about the historical, cultural, and social forces that shape our society. You'll become a real-world problem solver, prepared to be a champion for equality. You can graduate to a job at McDonald's where you help others, advocate for justice, and develop social innovations that change the world. These 5 interdisciplinary fields that are so incredibly valuable to the school are African and African American Studies. They had to separate those, apparently. Asian Pacific American Studies, Justice and Social Inquiry, Social and Cultural Pedagogy, and Women and Gender Studies. Those are the 5 critical interdisciplinary fields of the School of Social Transformation. We take a look at their website and we ask, why study here? I've taken screenshots of this. You can check it out on our Twitter at the HoloNet, so you can see this crap and know I'm not lying. They say, redefine your education for the 21st century job market in the fast food industry. At the School of Social Transformation, we go beyond traditional academic boundaries to create meaningful social change. Our innovative school has brought together 5, count them 5, fields of study and focused them around social justice. What does this mean for you? When you graduate, you'll be ready to implement social innovations that change the world, no matter who you work for. Which convenience store, Circle K or QT? Our graduates have gone on to work in law firms, domestic violence shelters, advocacy organizations, lobbyists, the FBI and intelligence organizations. I'll come back to that. State and national government, social work, refugee resettlement organizations. One more time for that because it's important for later. Refugee resettlement organizations. You know, like the one that tried to bring a caravan from Central America up through Mexico to the American border. Yeah, that was a refugee resettlement organization, kids. Museums and universities. Because, of course, this program will teach you how to indoctrinate others. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. We have a problem. Okay? Arizona, as described in the previous half hour, has historically been, and is in present tense, about to become again, the focal point of the battle for the border. The line must be drawn here, this spot, no further. As one of my great heroes, Captain Picard, would say. The problem is, here in Arizona, where the hammer will strike hardest, at ASU, of all places, we have the School of Social Transformation, the first in the country, opening up and taking on new students, teaching them how to be social justice warriors, how to indoctrinate others for the left. By the way, that's what social and cultural pedagogy means. Pedagogy is the study of teaching. So that's what you do if you want to be a high school or an elementary school teacher or a college professor. You study pedagogy. So social and cultural pedagogy is basically how to be an SJW school teacher. That's kind of the blend there. There are graduate and undergraduate programs that are available here. And the why study here portion of it really got my attention when they specifically outline that the groups of people that will best benefit from this program are going to be people who want to go into lobbying, people who want to work for non-governmental organizations, NGOs, people who want to work for the state and federal government, people who want to work for the FBI and the intelligence agencies. So you can understand radical right-wingers like me. Women and gender studies and justice and social inquiry. Now, mind you, this is different from studying law. This is studying justice and social inquiry, seeking to create equity and equality. If you want to hear an excellent spiel about equality in the workforce, an equal outcome, and how that simply doesn't work, I would recommend listening to Sargon of Akkad. He's put together some really remarkable work on that subject. But I really tried to find some good in this program, so I did some searching. I searched on theatlantic.com and felt I needed a shower afterwards, and I came across an article, The Age of Social Transformation by Peter F. Drucker. And it really does lay out very well, this is an article from 94, by the way, the greater plan behind this. The old communities, family, village, parish, and so on, have all but disappeared in the knowledge society. Their place has largely been taken by a new unit of social integration, the organization. Where community was fate, organization is voluntary membership. Where community claimed the entire person, organization is a means to a person's ends, a tool. For 200 years, a hot debate has been raging, especially in the West. Are communities organic, or are they simply extensions of the people of which they are made? Nobody would claim that a new organization is organic. It is clearly an artifact, a creation of man, a social technology. But who, then, does the community tasks? 200 years ago, whatever social tasks were to be done were done by in all societies by the local community. Very few of these tasks are being done by old communities anymore, nor would they be capable of doing them, considering they no longer have control of their members or even a firm hold of them. People no longer stay where they were born, either in terms of geography or terms of social position and status. By definition, a knowledge society is a society of mobility. And all the social functions of the old communities, whether performed well or poorly, and most were performed very poorly indeed, presupposed that the individual and the family would stay put. But the essence of knowledge society is mobility in terms of where one lives, mobility in terms of what one does, mobility in terms of one's affiliation. People no longer have roots. People no longer have a neighborhood that controls what their home is like, what they do, and indeed, what their problems are allowed to be. The Knowledge Society is a society in which many more people than ever before can be successful, but it is therefore, by definition, also a society in which more people than ever can fail, or at least come in second. And if only because the application of knowledge to work has made developed societies so much richer than any earlier society could ever dream of becoming, the failures, whether poor people or alcoholics, battered women or juvenile delinquents, are seen as a failure of society. So, what this piece in The Atlantic is telling us, the old ways are dead, and you're a fool for trying to cling to them. The only thing that can save you is organizations. Your organizations. I'm sorry. Cities didn't cease to exist. Towns didn't cease to exist. There is no reason that these communities cannot function for the support of themselves and of their citizens as they have for 200 years. This entire argument is built on a fallacy that it was never done well or it was never done correctly, because it is only focusing on it being done by the government, by the community. No. These ills are not fixed by your organizations or by your greater governmental spending or intervention. No, these problems are solved by the individual and by the people at the local level, doing what is best for them. This, folks, is the most disturbing piece of all. That the internal corruption, the corrosion that is eating away at the heart of our country, has reached the border. And if you have corruption and decay gnawing at the core, and forces from without pushing in, then Arizona is caught between the pincer. And as I said, here is where the hammer will fall the hardest. I believe it was famous Marine Corps commander, he was a general, I think, Chesty Puller. I believe it was him that said, "They have us surrounded. Those poor bastards." On that note, now that it seems the fervor and hubbub of the March for Our Lives is dying down, and lo and behold, the NRA still exists as a group, and it appears that the popularity of Mr. Hogg and his cohorts are now on the decline. And the next day dawned after the fire at the Trump building in New York, and it doesn't appear that it had anything to do with the president or the first lady, and thank God for that. And it should be noted that though one person has indeed died, the left is very readily mocking and praising the fire. Story carried by The Blaze. Chris Enlow, weekend editor over there, said a fire on the upper floors of Trump Tower on 5th Avenue of Manhattan tragically claimed the life of a resident on Saturday while injuring a number of firefighters fighting the blaze. But that didn't stop anti-Trump liberals from mocking and praising the fire, some joking it was caused by Trump burning evidence of Russian collusion. New York Fire Department responded to the 4-alarm fire burning on the 50th floor. Inside an apartment, firefighters found a man who was badly injured, transported the man to a local hospital where he later passed away from his injuries. The cause of the fire is under investigation. President Trump and his family were not present during the incident. But when I talk about the decay and corruption within, this is it. A man died. A man perished in a horrible way. He burned to death in a fire. And all anybody can seem to say is, "Look! Trump Tower's burning! Maybe it was the Russians." And then at ASU, we have the School of Social Transformation. College campuses around the country. High schools. We have hundreds calling for the erasure of constitutional rights that our forefathers fought, bled, and died for. We have a trade war with China that is heating up, signaling economic troubles in the future. And finally, we have the Mexican government ratcheting up their responses to President Trump's concept to militarize the border and build the wall that needs to happen. Now, on this show in the past, I've taken a rather ambivalent stance when it comes to President Trump. I've always said that I'll call him out when he does something stupid, and I'll support him when he does something right. Militarization of America's southern border is the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do during Barack Obama's tenure as president. It was the right thing to do during George W. Bush's tenure as president. It was the right thing to do by Woodrow Wilson in the early 1900s to set up a string of military bases and camps along the border in order to defend American citizens from the depredations of raiders and criminals coming over the border. And it's the right thing to do 100 years later. Send in the troops. Build the wall. You're listening to the Holonet Podcast here on the Lanterns Media Network. This show not brought to you by anybody in particular, because we don't have any sponsors at this time, but would like to invite you to hop on to patreon.com/Holonet. We're also on Maker Support. Find us out there if you would like to sponsor or donate to the Holonet Podcast. We are seeking to move to the AM dial, and are seeking out support to do that, to change the Holonet Podcast into Holonet Radio. And as always, I want to thank you for your patronage, for your listenership, for spending an hour with us every week. Keep your eyes peeled on theholonet.com for that story about the ASU School of School. I've said it 8 times, and now I'm screwing it up. Look at this. School of Social Transformation. I'll try to have that out to you later today, if not tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. Keep your eyes open and your head on a swivel. Because here in Arizona is where we hold the line against the night. And here at Lanterns Media Network, we're here to fix the machine. God, I hope we can do both and do it in time. So, from the west side of Phoenix, Arizona, God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Good night, everybody.